Greetings, MelVee family. What a blessing and a special opportunity I have on this podcast show to bring you a special edition of the Adventist heritage in Africa. And I've got the special person who has the history, has spent time studying this. He's an evangelist, he's an author, he's a writer, and he's a historian. And it is a blessing. Before I introduce him to you, let me invite you to like, to subscribe, to share this link with someone else, and make sure you add this to your favorites, because we're going to be bringing you more of these episodes on this series, the Adventist African Heritage. And with me today is Paul Sibanda. Greetings, my brother, and how are you?
I'm good, thanks for yourself, and thank you for having me.
It's a miracle to have you here today.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while we're talking about this thing. And
yes.
Finally, the day has come.
And there were hiccups in the middle. People don't know that there were passports that couldn't cross the borders to be.
Yeah, but we thank God. We thank God. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, you have distinguished yourself in Southern Africa through some of the works that you have written.
Yes.
God's grace
to our African race.
To our African race. God's grace to our African race. And as you wrote this book, you said there are men of talent in Africa, and if the workers from America knew how to recognize the ability and talent possessed by the African brethren, much more good would be done.
Actually, that was Ellen G. White.
Yeah, you quoted it here.
So
Ellen G. White,
yeah.
Testimonies to Southern Africa. There's talent in Africa, but our brothers can't see it.
Exactly.
But as you wrote this piece of work, maybe let's go back then. What was in your mind, and what had God triggered in your mind for you to start looking not in the current mission of preaching it, but where it is coming from, and what is the history of African heritage in Africa?
Okay, I think let me start what inspired me.
Yeah,
you see, I've been teaching church heritage to master guys for more than 12 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been a while now. So my issue was, when you came to the time where Africa has to be spoken in the manual, the church manual by the General Conference, you only had, I think, a piece on Africa.
Okay.
So for me, that bothered me to say, how can we have a lot of American Adventist history and very little of African history? So does it mean that we don't fit in that whole Adventist bigger picture? So that became a problem for me, until then I told myself, okay, fine, before I can complain about this, I should do something about it. Because you complain, they're going to say, okay, what have you done?
Yes.
Then I was like, okay, Lord, help me. But now the problem was that African Adventist history is not something that you go on the internet and you just click and then things come out.
Yeah.
It's because there's virtually nothing. It's bits and pieces.
Yes.
So that was my problem now. How do I put this together? I didn't know where to start. I didn't have the money to research on this.
Okay.
But I just told myself, Lord, help me. Let me go into this. And miraculously, God directed. And I spent 3 years.
Okay.
Self-funding.
Wow. 3
years, and you have to go to these countries, up Malawi, come this side, because I had to look at Southern Africa.
Yes.
And God did wonders. That up to now, when I look at the book, I just ask myself, how did this happen?
Wow.
Without even a budget. I had no budget, but I knew what I wanted to do.
Clarity of purpose,
yes,
a deep desire. You were bothered. That's the word you used. You were bothered.
I was bothered.
And you say this is the second edition.
Yes.
And it looks very thick.
Yeah, that's like 380 pages, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Now let's get into the history of Adventists, and maybe let's go back way back when it began.
Okay.
We know it was through the Millerite movement. So maybe if you can walk us through, how did this grace of God through the Advent message firstly reach our black brothers in America? Because they are us. They are still called Africans in America.
Correct.
So how did they receive this gospel? And because they have their own colonial story as well.
Yeah.
And how that came into the picture and disrupted or maybe enhanced. Walk us through that. And
okay. All right, thank you. I think, can I just begin by giving a definition? This is my own definition of history in the context of Adventism. I've said history is knowing the past in order to understand the present so that you can approach the future with confidence.
Wow.
So it's not just about knowing what happened. We know what happened so that we know where we are, what we're supposed to do now. And then we can have the confidence to say, I can walk into the future. with this same gospel because of what God has done in the past. Okay, so now we can start. I think let's start by the Millerite movement itself.
Yes.
It's not general knowledge, but when you study, you realize that the Millerite movement had black folks in it.
How do you say that? I've never heard that before.
It's all in the book. I actually mentioned them in the book. There quite a number of them.
Yes.
The Sojourner Truth, the powerful people that are actually in American history.
You talk about blacks in the movement.
Yes.
And you mentioned there's William Foy.
Exactly.
There's
he's the
Douglas.
Father. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I think Douglas and Rosetta Douglas.
Yes.
All right.
Daughter,
there's also, so that's Frederick Douglas, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The Frederick Douglas.
The Frederick, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And then there was William Foy was one of the guys who received the same call to preach the spirit of prophecy,
Correct.
right?
He's the first guy that God, so people think God is against blacks. But when God was looking for a prophet to lead the movement, he chose William Foy, a black guy.
Yeah. And then there was, you mentioned Isabella Bomfrey, the Sojourner Truth.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
And they say she's actually the most powerful woman that has ever lived within the black setup.
And none of that is highlighted in our history.
You won't find it. You will find it somewhere, bits and pieces, but it's not in our Adventist history.
Maybe that's why they say, African man, you're on your own. So if you don't stand up and preach your God, no one is going to do so. And so Millerite, from the history, my understanding, I used to teach as well, Bible Truth and Heritage when I was still
the good old days.
Yes, with that nice Bible Truth manual and the Church Heritage one.
Yeah.
And I think I would advise anyone who really wants to understand Adventists to go back there. Now, you say there were blacks in that movement and they played a key role.
Yes.
But the gospel reaching them, because remember, America is dealing with slavery at that time. The South is a place of continued divisions as to whether blacks should be let go, they should be free indeed. And even in Africa, back then, there was an issue of slavery. So walk us through the great disappointment and how that affected the black community and how they still stood up later for the gospel.
Okay. All right. So we begin with the church, 1863, the former organization of the Seventh Adventist Church. Now, most of us don't understand or have never really want to find out why 1863. God does his things with time, and he knows why he does things.
Yes.
So one has to ask themselves, what was happening in the 60s in the USA? And remember, we're coming from a backdrop that says that the Millerite movement had no racists.
Yeah.
There were blacks in there.
Okay.
And some of those people, even when the church was founded in 1863, there were blacks that were there.
All right.
Yes, Eri Barr is there in the book. Yeah, he's one of the people that even Ellen G. White said, you know what, we've worked with him. He's a good man.
All right.
But you don't hear such things. And then so the church comes 1863. It's coming as a supporting system, because in the 60s, we are slavery it was abolished in 1865 December, but in January of 1863, slaves had been set free because Abraham Lincoln had come as a new president in 1860, and he had come on a platform that is opposing slavery.
Yeah.
So he then said, not all the slaves, may they be released. That was in 1863 January.
Yeah.
Our church was founded in May 1863. So this is like the same time things are happening. Yes.
All right.
There's slavery and there's the American Civil War. So slavery is coming to an end. The American Civil War is at its peak. So, and then the church, then God places the church right there.
Wow. In the time of upheaval.
Yes. So my history then tells me that the church, in fact, very few people know that the church, the Seventh Adventist Church, actually played a pivotal role to end the American Civil War through fasting and prayer.
All right.
Yes.
All right.
Then so the church, why is God bringing the church in the middle of the end of slavery and the beginning or the middle of the American Civil War?
Yeah.
He wants the church to play a pivotal role. So our church is not just to preach. It is also to end issues issues that are
issues.
bothering people.
Yeah.
So we're coming there as an answer. For the slavery, because the recently freed slavery, they need somebody who's going to teach them. Because remember, law was saying a slave must not be taught how to read and write. So they were illiterate. Slavery was also saying, guys, you need to eat pork. Pork was part of their meals.
Diet. That's cheap.
So the church has got a reform, a health reform message. Yeah. So it's coming there to sort of like fit in and be the answer and be that supporting system. But then the question is, did the church play the role that God had called them to do?
In fact, 1844, just a little bit of details there from my understanding. We are on the 6th seal.
Yes.
Miller has understood that as Jesus is breaking the 6th seal, the earthquake, the dark day, the stars falling, and then verse 14, the skies opening. And then 1833, he witnesses, because he's in America now.
Yes.
He witnesses the starry showers. He goes back to Matthew. He goes to Revelation. He then says the next event, and he goes back to Daniel, chapter 8, unto 2,300, then shall the sanctuary, 300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. So he works out his prophetic charts and the timelines, and he convinces himself 1844 Jesus is coming. But there was a great disappointment.
Yes.
And then a few years down the line, 10, 15 years or so, or maybe 13 years, then the church is formed. Because they've come to an understanding that there's a great work to be done. And what is that great work? Revelation 14, verse 6 to 12, fear God. That's the message now the church is preaching to the world. But then the blacks are part of that movement, you're saying? But how did the church, I know you mentioned this briefly, but I think someone needs to understand how the church actually freed the slaves. I know there was prayer, I know there was fasting, but what else did the church do to free the slaves so that they can receive the gospel and benefit from being free?
Okay. So we're talking about 1863 and just some years after that. So the church began in the east, the eastern side of the USA.
Okay.
So that's where Michigan. So, but if you then start following where the church is going from there, it's going west to California.
Okay.
Not south. And who was south? Who were the people living in the south? That's where the majority of the blacks were. But that's where the large farms were.
Yes.
So we're seeing a church that has been installed by God to be a healing stream, to be a supporting system for these blacks. But they're not doing that. They are going west, where their other white brethren are.
Okay.
So God sees this. And remember, these are the days of Ellen G. White. And Ellen G. White is part of the Millerite movement. And I just want to say this. There are people that say Ellen G. White was racist. That is incorrect. Because she's part of the Millerite movement. And the Millerites are coming in with a non-racial approach. Yes. But obviously there were others who were there.
Yes.
If we have time, we can talk about Ellen G. White and how she put her neck
on the line to defend the multiracial movement.
So that happened. So now God is looking at this church. It's doing the opposite of what it's supposed to be doing. They're doing fine, but then they've got a greater work. So God then speaks to Ellen G. White through a vision. And she says, sin lies at the door of the church because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So you, Ellen White, as the messenger of God, I want you to tell the leaders that they're missing the mark.
Okay.
So obviously this was heavy for her, but she had to do it. So, and that must have been I forgot the actual year, but I think it was 1890 or 91. So she addressed about 30 leaders, general conference leaders, about this issue.
All right.
And she told them the church, sin lies at the door of the church. We are not doing anything for the coloreds who have been recently been released. And they listened, but again, nothing happened. And, to put, as if that was not enough, they sent her to Australia.
Oh, that's the time.
As if trying to silence the message.
Yes.
So if you look at it critically, she has just said something great, and she's the brainchild of this thing. But then why are you sending her?
Away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when she went, obviously the message
Went with
died.
her. Well, she went with the message to Australia. There are also Aborigines
Yes.
there, and she actually had a great impact on that diversity in Australia. But again, those are the silent years when the message gets lost in the US and nothing then gets to happen. Now, who are these white pioneers then who then finally got the message and sent it to the blacks and incorporated the blacks who were in the South? Definitely that work got to happen.
Yeah.
She wrote extensively about it and even how it should be funded.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So what happened was that I think the second born, he had the name of the father, so that must have been Edson.
Yes.
Yeah, Edson White. James Edson White.
Yes.
Yeah. So he's the guy that remembered, my mother once said something about the colors. Because he was trying to revive himself, he had gone into business. I think it was in Chicago, and so religion became, wavering. So he wanted to come back.
All right.
And it was like, the best way of coming back is for me to work for the Lord. But then how? I need a special work. What can I do? Then he remembered, my mother once said something about colors.
I think God reminded him.
Yeah, and then he's like, but where can I get this? Because when Ellen White gave this address to this GC the leadership, a book was her message was put in a booklet. Okay. I think it's a message to the colored people. I think it still exists, so people can just go and look for it.
Yeah.
But then now the problem was when this Edson guy was looking for the message, no one knew about it. He went to the general conference. Where is the book? No one knows about it. Asking other elderly people, they've forgotten. So it means that this whole
message to the blacks
was taken lightly. Then he had to look for it. It was so. It's actually in the book. I actually narrate everything. How he spent time looking for. He went to the old Review and Herald, where the Review and Herald was.
Yeah.
And he looked for it until he found it at the bottom of a heap of piles of something that was just about to be thrown out. Yeah, that's where he found that little booklet. And to him, it was like, I have found what I want to do. I found my mission. So now he had his wife. So he sat down with his wife and told his wife about this mission. Then he had a friend, William Palmer, and his wife. So they sat down and said, guys, this is what God has inspired me to do. Can you guys help me do this? The wife was like, yes, I'll do that. Will Palmer was like, I'll help you. Then the wife, so the four of them.
All right.
So James Edson White, William Palmer, and their wives. So there are four. So these guys were very adventurous, So they built a boat, like a small ship.
Yeah.
And I forgot the name, too much stuff. I forgot the name, but it's in the book.
All right.
Then they gave it a name. Then they went down the Mississippi.
All right.
Going south. But remember, this was not going to be an easy expedition because there's hatred. The blacks are saying, you guys made us to be what we are.
All right.
So you cannot then come with the gospel to us when you are actually the vehicle.
Very, very people who made us who we are.
Yes. So now, but these guys were putting there was war. They could have lost their lives.
Yeah.
So the General Conference then, in fact, the General Conference was not really into this. They gave them like, the budget was very small from the General Conference.
Yeah.
James White actually complained to his mother. He wrote a letter to his mother
saying,
look, the General Conference doesn't want to fully fund this thing. They've given us something, but it's not enough. They have the resources. So Ellen White then said, you know what, don't worry about that. God will always see you through.
All right.
So this is what you should do. Write a small book. Sell the book.
Okay.
The royalties from the book put into the work. And that's what I think it was the Gospel Prime, I think. Yeah, a small book.
Okay.
He wrote that book, sold it, took the money, put it into the mission. And then so they would teach from that ship. They were inside because they couldn't go out.
Okay.
So the blacks would come.
Yeah.
Then they would teach them how to read and write, teach them the health message, teach them about a Christ who forgives, a Christ who gives people second chance, a God of love. They knew God, yes, but some of them they were now doubting. So this is how then the Black Adventist work began. Then the General Conference also saw that, okay, things were happening. Then they also started, coming in.
Yeah.
So that was 1895.
This is like almost 40 years after the beginning of the church. And so the work then grew.
Yes.
And from then on, the mission of the church was go to the ends of the world and preach the gospel. And on our next episode, I want us to talk about how it came into Africa.
Okay.
And maybe the closing part for this episode is to look at where this message started, and given the clarity and the prophetic stage that God had set for the church. And I know we're focusing only on the blacks, but there were many other nationalities or races in America at that time. I guess on another time we could talk about them. But my interest is to look at the African heritage. From my little understanding, it looks like the black emphasis of the gospel in America didn't die. It actually continued to grow, particularly because of the liberation of the country, but also many other black luminaries that came up later and were fighting for civil rights, because the abolition of slaves did not actually free the blacks. Many things remained undone. And in the gospel space, it was even worse. There was segregation of congregations, and even the appointment of missionaries and pastors. I'm not a black American guru, but maybe talk to us about the progression of that work into the civil rights movement. We're now into the 1900s later on. How did God continue to work with that community?
Okay, so I think before I can talk about that, I think we just missed, I think there's something important. In 1844, when the great, that October 1844 great disappointment, they were told that they should go back. Then there's the vision of Hiram Edson and how he saw Christ, things like that.
Moving into the most,
But then they were led, after prayer, they were led to Bible study, where they realized that God can never lie. So if there's a problem, it should be on their side. So they went back to the Bible and they were led to Revelation 10, verse 10 and 11. And he told them that, when I took a little scroll, put it in my mouth, on my lips, it was sweet, but in the belly, it became bitter. Yeah. Then it continues and says, but then go back and preach again. But this time, prophesy to all the nations, kindred, and tongues.
And kings, yes.
And I always tell people, there was no way Jesus would come in 1844. Because as you said, there were blacks and other nationalities that had not heard of this gospel.
Yeah.
So that was a bit too overambitious
for
the Millerites to
think they're going away on their own.
They would have gone on their own. And how about the other guys,
Yeah.
So going to this the black issue, America, blacks were saying we want our rights.
Yeah.
We now know the gospel. The gospel makes people wise. The gospel makes people wise.
I wish you could add a lot to that, because wherever the gospel has gone and has been accepted for what it is, development and civilization of nationalities happens.
Yes.
It's not a colonial project.
No, it's not.
It's a divine project. Yeah.
Exactly. So it opens up the mind and we start seeing things differently. The wisdom comes from the word of God. So that was happening. When these blacks were accepting the gospel, the Advent message, they were becoming wise. And they realized that, we have got this from these former colonial masters of ours, but we can use this to up our game, to up our lives, and they started teaching it among themselves.
You talk about Elder Humphreys here.
All right. That's
who attended the meetings along other black leaders, and there was this thing they called the Black Conferences, but the GC was not accepting it as a movement back then. And then he oversaw the development of what we now know as black institutions. Talk to us about that a little bit.
Yeah, I love this guy. But unfortunately, his end was very tragic. He was a good preacher. I mean, I think in the whole of Adventist history, I think he stands up there with the C.D. Brooks.
All right.
As the powerful black preachers. They would invite him. He would speak at general conferences in front of whites and everything. So powerful. So, and very influential. So he realized that, guys, we have heard the gospel, but then there's something that's lacking.
Yeah.
Because now we are still subscribing to the conferences. And sometimes, it's not, you are not racist.
All
because
right.
look, we are different. Whites and blacks, we are different and we see things differently. So sometimes, this is why if you go and preach at a white church and you are jumping around with the black, to them it's noise.
Yeah.
But if you come to the black churches, you are the man.
Yes.
So we are different. We are wired differently. So this guy was like, we need to have our own conferences where we have our own leaders.
Yeah.
But then generally they were saying, blacks, you can't lead yourself because you don't know what leadership is. So we can't put you into leadership. You need to go and learn first.
Yeah.
And this guy was saying, no, we are ready for this. We can do this. Give us the opportunity. And then our general conference and the leadership, they were saying no. Then these guys, they said, okay, then if you cannot take it through talking, diplomacy through the round table, then we'll have to use another way.
Yeah.
And so there were protests.
Yes.
Protests. It was hectic.
Wow.
It was so bad. I'll tell you of one incident that happened. So Oakwood University is the black, the pride of black.
That's where I wanted us to get to, because I'm like, where did Oakwood come in the whole picture?
Hey, that was 1896, so you can see just there.
Yeah.
So those are the results of this man standing up and saying, guys, we need to have our own colleges. Where we can send our black people and teach them how to be pastors, and they preach to their own people. Because the whites, it was fair because the whites were having theirs. Andrews University was there.
Yeah.
And some of these universities, you were not allowed there.
Yeah, Loma Linda was there, Andrews was there.
They were there, but then the blacks couldn't go there. So they were fighting for their own rights.
Wow.
To stand alone. And then this guy was the leading light for this issue. And then he became a marked man.
Yes.
And then they chased him away from church. They stripped him off his pastorship. But then he did a mistake of his own both. He started another church. And then
that's how he left.
But then
the movement.
The movement carried on because others were coming to help.
Yes.
Where these fallen giants were, others would come in and take this thing and go forward. And then the results.
Yeah.
We ended up having the Peters, those are powerful people.
So to be honest, and this is the history perhaps we are not very proud of. The predominantly white GC didn't want the black church to grow.
Yes.
And you do right in this, where they actually try to convince people because of the demise or Humphreys being removed from the church and him going out to set up his own church, that you see what he was working for is not good.
It was all about pride.
Yeah, it's about him, and they tried to actually dismantle that machinery. But thank God that work didn't end. The Harlem church came up. You talk about it in the book.
Yeah, powerful, massive church.
Elder Dixon was there as one of the very first members, and work began and institutions were set up. And today we celebrate over hundreds, if not 200 years of many of these institutions that were set up. And you do talk a little bit about the luminaries or notable Oakwood College speakers. Charles D. Brooks.
Yeah, my favorite. My favorite.
Elder Ill
Cleveland.
Edward Ill Cleveland.
One of my favorites.
Yes.
These are massive, powerful people. And
Very powerful.
And these guys, they would preach. And some of these guys, like Cleveland, he was in a league of his own.
True.
Because they were working together with these black conscious guys.
Yes.
The Malcolm X's of that time and the guys before.
Yeah.
So Adventism was there. I'm always asking, our Adventism of today, we are not there where the action is. But they were there.
They were there with the Martin Luthers and all these Malcolm X's. Yeah. They were rubbing shoulders with them. Joseph Jimenez Lawrence, powerful speaker. And many of these guys lived until the 1900s and late into the 20th century, and have remained powerful. Now, they were not only men. You talked about women too. Ruth Temple.
Yeah, Lottie Blake.
Lottie Black.
Yes.
And Mary Britton. There was Eileen Dumas.
Yes.
There was the Eliana Wright.
Yes.
Irene Morgan.
So most of them were in the medical side,
yes,
music.
Yes.
But they were, doing the same thing with the same goal.
Yeah. So they didn't need to compete to be on the stage. Again, the gender issue that comes up. It was not just
not competition.
Men, but it was women as well. I'm quite fascinated by the first, you mentioned here, Havith Williams.
Yes.
The first senior pastor of the and the first black pastor in the Seventh-day Adventist Church in America. And Olisa Swart, who was the first black commissioned SDA female pastor in Africa. By that time, we're already in the continent.
Yeah.
But we'll come to the continent later on.
The continent, yes.
Yeah. So your closing remarks on how God oversaw the spreading of the gospel among blacks in America, and any thoughts on that for anyone watching out there today on the blacks in America and the Advent message?
All right. So obviously God had wanted blacks in this movement, and He would have taken it whether it was by force or by fire, and it did happen.
Yeah, by force.
Yes, and they started seeing the results. Tithes went up, and membership went up. So this guy now came and said,
and congregation
grew, and the black churches had the largest numbers. Like the Harlems, they were like 800,000 in those days.
Yeah.
So it just confirmed that God was in it. God was in this, and then people's eyes started opening up to the reality of all this, and God was saying, let's move forward, not as whites and blacks, but as a people. Yes, let's move forward with this Advent message as a people. So it was not just about blacks and white, but I mean, that's where the bone of contention was. But God was saying this thing must encompass everybody.
Yes. In fact, the gospel was to be preached to all kindreds, to all nations, to all tongues, and to all people. Chapter 10, you quoted Eded and Kings.
Yes.
I discovered later on it's because the devil has also his 3 angels' messages, and those are going particularly to the kings. That's what Revelation 16 says. They go to the kings to prepare them for Armageddon. So when you see Revelation 14, it says go to the people, the tongues, nations, and kindred. It doesn't include kings. But after the reading of the small book, the bitterness and the sourness, or the sweetness and the sourness of that experience, God then added a group in Revelation 10, all right, to say, go to all kindreds, people, and tongues, and kings. Because the satanic agenda is also going to the kings, and God wants this gospel in the kings. And which continent has more kings than the rest of this world?
Africa.
It's Africa.
Yes, correct.
So I want us to come back and talk about episode 2, where we'll be talking about the gospel coming to Africa. This is your Adventist African Heritage series with Paul Sibanda. Thank you so much, my brother. We'll see you on episode number 2. God bless you. Remember to like, to subscribe, and to follow this series so that you don't miss out on how God has been working on this great continent and beyond. God bless you.
Amen.